Welcome back, dead effalumps.
You would think after 1.5 seasons you could say the word elephants.
No.
Cara, I know you've listened to a few of our episodes. Duncan also can't say entrepreneurship.
Oh, I love
and this
it.
has come up repeatedly.
Entrepreneurship.
Yes.
Yeah, it's good.
Slightly more American.
Yeah, it is. Well, I did spend 5 years there. So, I still call it gas when I go to the
Yeah.
petrol station. Episode number 2, talking on the idea of workship. Cara is joining us. It's so good having you back here again. One of the things we want to jump into is something anxiety-inducing for Chris. And probably, in fairness, Chris, I don't think you're alone. I think most people have a blind panic about career. What should I do? What am I called to do? What's my gifts allowing me to do? It really is a panic-inducing thing, and that's the episode for today. Is that let's really flesh this out, and then, hopefully by the end of it, we can feel a little bit more comfortable with God in charge of the human resources department for our lives. Yeah?
I love it.
Yeah, so I wrote a book published in 2017.
No, this is Cara's episode.
No, and I've got
I want to hear about
Duncan,
Okay.
do you know what? In our last episode with Cara, I thought of like 5 flashpoints where I could talk about my upcoming book, and I didn't.
Oh, wow.
So let me have my moment.
Okay, yeah, go for it. Go for it.
I shared my story of mental health, Cara, and particularly one point of breakdown around my 30th birthday. But since that book was published, interestingly, I relapsed 2 years ago. And both times I can see so clearly that career was the trigger point for my decline. That's manifest in a bunch of different ways. The first time I ended up in hospital, I was 6 weeks from finishing Bible college and a ministry position that I had to decide on. This time I stepped away from a ministry position, have had 3 years that I've felt like I've been in the wilderness, although as I said last episode, I've found meaning and purpose in my role as a father and my work being exercised in that capacity. But about 12 months into this 3-year period, I really spiraled and, what am I going to do next? Huge anxiety levels. I've got 4 university degrees and I say that with no pride, but actually it's a symptom of my anxiety that I better tick every box just in case I need to do a career change or just in case that one's not working for me. So this has been no joke for me, the question of what am I meant to do? And deep down, I know it's not the main question God is asking of me, and yet I've never been able to emotionally shake it. Although in the last 2 years, I think I've made a good level of peace about it. The way I talk about it in my book is, and I really, really wrestled with saying this, my conclusion about myself, and I can't speak for other people, the reason the trigger point towards a spiral was career was that I had fundamentally started idolizing career.
Yeah.
It meant so much to me to get right that it was destroying me when it wasn't happening. I would be very slow to say that about someone else for pastoral reasons, and I can't read anybody's heart. But for me, it was no accident that career was the flashpoint. So that's a little bit of my backstory. I guess to Duncan's point, how common is this tension with people and with Christians, this question of what?
Why don't we start in a different place? Because only because I want to get to that question. But what if the question, because I think we approach careers very differently in the room right now. So why don't we share a little bit of a backstory on how we pick our career?
Sure.
I'll go first so you can feel miserable. Okay.
Misery is Duncan's spiritual
It's
gift.
my spiritual gift.
Yeah.
I have an adage: when you don't know what to do, just do something, and surely something will happen. And so my attitude has always been: try something. If you don't like it, go try something else. It's no big deal. Probably throughout life, you're going to have 6 or 7 different career changes. So just enjoy the ride. And so, which has been probably a narrative for my job. I was in business consulting, went into IT, then work in webmastering for a bit, and then ended up at a Bible college working as a youth pastor, and then overseas to a pastor, came back and became a radio host. Now I'm back pastoring and doing some consulting stuff on the side. Like for me, it's like just try stuff and see if you like it and go for it. And somewhere along the line, I've had a very varied and different career, but I carry weight in the sense of I need to provide for my family, and that's a big deal. But for the most part, in terms of what I should be doing, I feel confident that if the good Lord called me to stack shelves at Coles, I'll do it. Like it just doesn't bother me. And so when it comes to career choices for me personally, there's a certain element of a serendipitous bliss. Oh, I'll try for that. That sounds interesting. And if I get it, great. If not, God's probably got a hand in it and didn't want me to have it, and I'll go on to whatever the next thing. But what I don't like is sitting by idly, and as part of that, I think I was in a season where I didn't know what to do, and I had a nice high jiu-jitsu belt, and so I coached jiu-jitsu for a season. I don't think it was ornate or special, but I loved doing it, and for the season I was in, it was really helpful and paid the bills. And so that, when it comes to career choice, I think I'm complete random chance and happenstance, but that's the approach that I often take to picking a career. Chris, how do you pick a career?
I don't. I get crippled and I don't choose anything. Look, I envy that. I think there's a truth to that. My devil's advocate on what you've just said is if you aim for nothing, you won't hit anything.
Yeah, totally.
And I think generally, if I can broaden the conversation a little bit, I think in evangelical circles, we can overplay the doctrine of God's sovereignty as an excuse for human inactivity or poor stewardship.
Which
So-
I would agree. Don't do nothing.
Yep.
Do something.
Yes. And I that's a good distinction, and there's wisdom there. So my reaction to what you're saying is I'm envious of it. My kindness to myself says, well, that's not my personality.
No, it's not you. That's why you're here. And I think that's healthy.
As in you and I are so different.
Well, by the way, I say all of this to hear how you choose a career, because I don't think there's one way of choosing careers because there's not one type of person. So I actually hope, and I hope because I know it is, you have a very different attitude to career stuff and how you select it and how you think about it.
Yep.
And it's important to hear that because that's honoring of someone else who's listening and going, oh, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Like
He's like me.
I could not function like Duncan. He's a lunatic.
Yeah, I mean, for me, two things. I do cost benefit analyses.
Yeah.
And I just take it out of my emotion and into my rational self to go,
So you got a spreadsheet.
let's take all of this rumination
Yeah.
that's happening in my quiet moments and let's put it on a piece of paper, articulate and park it in a document so it has boundaries.
Yeah.
And not only do I put the pros and cons, but I'll put out of 10 how important is that pro or that con and come to a score at the end. That won't be my sum total. I'll then, I know I'm such a nerd.
This is beautiful.
I'll then take
I used to do that when I was dating girls.
Don't get me started on that.
I don't treat girls as spreadsheets.
Oh, you can rip me to shreds
Wow.
later.
And then I'll take it to wise counsel who I trust
Yeah.
and seek their counsel. So that's broadly speaking my objective process. But the other thing for me, Cara, perhaps for you to know is in my journey of self-awareness, I realized as I got older that one of the reasons I had such a complicated relationship with organized work is I had a very strong entrepreneurial streak in me.
Wow.
And so I've found myself, I now have my own property development company
Brilliant.
that I did during pastoral ministry. It was my side hustle that became a bit more serious. And it was one of the reasons I enjoyed pastoral ministry is it was a very open-ended job. And so one of the reasons I struggled with 9 to 5 is that I realized I've actually got a really high work ethic.
Yeah.
I just am a self-starter in my personality. And that's when I'll be like a dog at a bone for something that I really believe in, even if it means I have to create it from scratch. So you've done a lot of listening, but you're our guest, Cara. How do you
Man,
choose?
This is just fascinating.
How do you choose your what's?
So on that question, how did you choose your career?
Yes.
Because you're going to then tell us how you do it now.
Cool. So I remember clearly when I'm older than you guys. So in my family, it was about you work as hard as you can at school. You get as high a mark as you can in your HSC or your final exams or whatever. And then you do the highest possible university course that you can do so that you can earn the most amount of money that you can.
That was the
look after your
recommendation
family.
from my parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the whole goal. And that's.
I bitterly disappointed them.
So my brother was a doctor.
Wow.
I slaved away, and you got to rank the different courses that you might do with the hope that you get the mark. So my number one was law, and that was from my family's perspective, that would be, the appropriate level for me to do. And I quite like the idea of law. It seemed to have some good things in it. I was into sort of English and history and those sort of things. So I thought, yeah, I can do this. And then during schoolies.
Where is this going?
Classic. All right.
I was lying on the beach. And
3 Jaeger bombs deep.
I don't want to do law. I want to be a journalist.
Wow.
And so, unbeknownst to my parents, I swapped my preferences around. And in the end, I got enough marks to do law. So my parents got a bit of a shock when I announced them that, I'd actually been accepted into journalism. So that was not, I was going against sort of my parents' creed into there. And I think sometimes in Christian circles, that is our default creed in families for whatever we believe. We sort of buy into that. We want our kids to do the best possible course to earn the most possible money. That's sort of, we just buy into that as sort of one of the 10 commandments. Well, it's definitely not anywhere there. So I went into journalism. I had really high ideals. I was going to discover truth and, blow everyone's socks off with unearthing unethical practices.
That would have been great 80 years ago. Not today.
Well, there's a lot of it around unethical practices. But yes, I realise that.
Most of it in journalism.
Ow.
Cara, one of my 4 degrees is journalism, can
There
I
you
say?
go.
So.
And you're absolutely right, because that's what I discovered, that actually I broke every one of the journalists' 10 rules of ethics just in my first year of journalism. Journalism, and it ended up that maybe after, 15 years of hard work, you might get to a point where you can do that brilliant investigative journalism. But the stuff that I was doing was just really mediocre, and it would be sensationalized. And I realized it was very different to what I hoped it would be. But in the end, I had a clash over ethics with the news director. And suddenly, those years of study and everything was just gone instantly. I was working in a small regional town, and if you don't agree with the news director and lose your job because of that, there's no one else who wants to employ you. So I ended up moving into communications, and I really didn't like that because that was about putting a spin on stuff, and couldn't do that with my integrity. So then I moved into human resources, and then I got a chance in business analysis, and then I did consulting, and then I became a mother and still did consulting, and then I went into policy and advocacy. I've got a blancmange. I used to call it, it almost looks like I can't decide what to do. I feel a lot
HeyDictionary.com. What's blancmange? Sorry.
It's just a mess.
Mess.
Stuff
Okay.
Together. Maybe an Eton mess. Yes, but I now know that what you call it is portfolio career. I had a portfolio career, many different aspects of it. I think what I look back on and see is that God was shaping all these different things. Nothing is wasted in God's economy. So all your 4 degrees will be used in some way.
And I can already start to see that as I've gotten older.
Exactly. You can't see it at the time.
No.
But you look back and you just think, that's what you were doing, God. You were doing this and this so that I could get to here. You asked me last time about writing the book. Well, I was working at Ridley College, and I wouldn't have actually had time to write a book when the publisher invited me to, but they ended my contract. And I was really angry at the college. I was really angry at God. I was like, what are you doing, God? This was my perfect job. Here I am trying to raise the next generation of pastors to have a theology of faith and work. This is fantastic. What are you doing, God? And then I realized that now, looking back, it was creating a 6-month window so I could actually write a book. And the book has become the means by which other things have happened. So it always makes a lot more sense in hindsight. It's very hard at the time to live with that.
And I actually think for our listeners, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag of my 3rd book concept that if someone steals and I see it on the shelf, I'll be I know it's about me. No, I've got this concept I've had in my head for some time of the quarter life crisis.
Nice.
And pastorally, I think being a young adult, and why I'm speaking to the audience, is one of the hardest times to be a Christian in this way, because you have the Sunday school theology of who you've been told God is and his faithfulness and his fatherness. But as you get older, you start to get the practical data points to see, oh my gosh, like he really has come through for me. And I can point to these experiences in my life. But when you're transitioning from that child to adult moment, you've only got the theory of it.
Yes.
And can I really depend on him? And that first letdown and that first disappointment, the first breakup, the first career change, whatever it is, I think is the hardest one because you're still in the theory. But as I've gotten older, I can see God's faithfulness more and more in what I learnt to what I've actually experienced as well.
100%. And I think you're right that, we've got sort of a range of different faith things that tell us a false story. So that story of, we will be blessed. I don't really see that in the Bible. Like Jesus was this itinerant guy who went around. Paul went all different places and worked in the marketplace when he could. Did they live the blessed life? Paul's list of what happened to him as a Christian is just, shipwrecked how many times and thrown out and people tried to kill him all the time. Like, yeah.
Well, scripturally, there's only one reference to someone who lives the best life, right? Which is the prayer of Jabez, which is Jabez prays that he might live a blessed and easy life, which is immediately granted to him, and he's never heard it from Scripture again.
That's right.
To your point, like Job gets 57 chapters of woe, but there's something in that story.
Yeah.
And Jabez gets exactly what he was after, which is a blessed life, and got exactly one line in Scripture. And so I think that narrative of struggle, one of the things we're unpacking on Sunday, which I was looking forward to, is we've got this idea of enlightenment, but why don't we have this theology of endarkenment?
Yo,
right?
Nice. I like that. Yeah.
There is a presence of God in those dark seasons of the night. Like there's a reason there's a book called Dark Night of the Soul, which everyone points at.
John across.
Yeah, and it's like, what if you learnt the ability to find comfort in the darkness? And not only that, when it comes to the nature of work, is we all want to work the perfect job, but that's a little bit of entitlement.
Huge.
Can I say? that many of us work jobs that we don't necessarily love and enjoy. And maybe part of the narrative of work is to find the presence of Jesus in that and find your fulfillment in Jesus rather than hope for the perfect job. Last episode you talk about the great resignation. I wrote this piece called The Great Sabbatical of Me, which was about COVID, is that one of the beautiful things was this giant self-assessment. What are my values? What do I care about? What do I want to do? But also as part of that came along this huge amount of entitlement. Well, my anticipation is this, and this. And it's like, yeah, that's not going to go down well in a workforce. Like sometimes people just need you to show up and do a job. Yep. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Show up, do the job. It may suck. You may not enjoy it. It may be really difficult. You may get to the end of it and find it all falls apart. That's great. Jesus is still present. He's still king. And be okay with some of that. And that's where I feel like, part of some of this narrative is this giant sense of career choice. I just need everything to line up perfectly and doves to explode behind me. And this light to radiate down upon me as I step into my calling. It's like sometimes you just need to build a tent, right?
Yeah.
Just move the needle.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm being a bit mean.
No, I think that's 100% right. I think we get it back to front because we talk about career, not calling. And I think calling is helpful because it reminds us that the focus is not what I do, but it's on the fact that someone is calling me. It's about relationship with God, a calling. And calling is being called into relationship with God and living that out in the different contexts in which he places us. And once we see it like that, then that shifts it all over the place. I think God as vocational director is the best way to look at it. He is the one who knows us best. He is the one who knows what's going to happen. I think Ephesians 2:10 is really helpful at this point, that we are God's workmanship. We are his poiema. He's crafting us lovingly in Christ Jesus to do good works that he has prepared in advance for us to do. So he is the best one to decide who we are and how we should do things. And the work that we do, yes, it may not be perfect, but actually that may be a tool for the way that God is shaping us. So Eugene Peterson once said that the primary location of spiritual formation is the workplace.
Wow.
It's good.
The primary location. So that is the place where we get tested, we get challenged, those difficult volunteers that you have to deal with, Duncan, the kids that you have to deal with, Chris, like they're the ways that God is shaping us for relationship with him and relationship with others, preparing us for heaven in many ways. And yeah, he's gifted us. There is good work that we'll get to do. Sometimes calling and career line up. Sometimes they don't, and that's okay. So maybe you just do the job of jiu-jitsu training, but that enables you to be able to, set up a studio on the side to get into podcasting. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, it's not always the thing that you feel passionate about that
I feel
paves the
very
way.
passionate about VT1. It just doesn't pay well. Jiu-jitsu was awesome. I really love that job. It just doesn't pay very well. Neither does stand-up comedy. I could run through a whole bunch of jobs that don't
Got to
pay
get into
well.
property, dude. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Property in Sydney. Oh, get back
I
there.
am completely remedial when it comes to the ability to make money in any way, shape, or form. I just purely choose ridiculous
But
artistic
what a
and
pretty face.
Oh my goodness.
Am I wrong, Cara?
thanks for noticing.
No comment. No comment.
Wow, is this how we're evaluating career?
There's no sheen for Cara. Cara, I was the youth pastor of her kids, right? Like
Yeah.
she's seen terrible 23-year-old
yeah.
Duncan. She knows how bad it is. There's no pretense for her in here.
At the end of the year in our church, they used to have
you gonna
this
tell a
thing.
Duncan
I'm
War
gonna
story?
tell you a
Oh,
story.
yes.
They
Okay,
used
go.
to do this thing where they would have a video to show us what our kids had been up to in youth group. Because it was almost like, I don't know if you actually did this, but the kids never told us entirely what they did in youth group. I don't know if you swore them to secrecy because that'd be really wrong. But at this video at the end of the year, you'd see this stuff happen and the mess and the chaos and
It's good times.
and Duncan just loving all of that.
Yeah, it's good.
And I would think, I am glad every child is alive at this point. But more than that, they're
Controlled chaos.
Chaos.
But
Yeah.
more than that they're passionate about going to church
There you
because
go.
they love it.
Yeah.
So I love your giftedness in all those areas. And I think that's a big part of what discovering your call is about. How has God gifted you? How can you step into that?
Yep.
Is there ways to figure that out?
Yeah.
No, I know. But I'm asking that question to give you a chance for an individual who doesn't know about Enneagram or Strengths Finder or Gallup assessments or whatever they are,
Those are all good
Myers-Briggs. Because I think part of that is like, what am I gifted at?
Yeah.
That's a big, anyone in their teenage years through to their early 20s is always asking that question.
And you don't know yourself fully yet. That's
No,
been
you
my
don't.
reflection.
That's the big thing. And if
Yeah.
you're gifted at something, you don't know you're really great at
Yeah.
it. So you do need someone else to help you out there. You need a good friend, a family member, or someone that you can just say, hey, what do you see I do that you think I'm really gifted at?
Yeah.
Because frequently we can't see it ourselves. I think that's a big thing. Like, I think gifts are a big clue. I think also God works with what we're passionate about.
Yeah.
In some circles, Christian circles, you don't talk about your passions. Somehow they're bad and that God wouldn't want me to work in my passions because that would be bad. But no, I think God gives us things we're passionate about for a reason, and that there's often just a signal or a sign in there that can help us in terms of finding our calling.
Well, I mean, if you were passionate about tobacco farming, I would probably strongly push back and just say, well, let's pray on that some more. But, there's a couple of passion projects that I might, say, hey, maybe.
And I think the challenge is, if that's the horse that drags the cart of what you end up doing, there's a bit of a challenge to our fear of man. Like, what if those passions and those giftings are not what's revered by my peers?
Yes.
And is that okay to put that to one side and say, actually, no, God has made me this way, and therefore that's going to be my driving force, not what other people think of me and not what even I might think of myself if I take it in inverted commas the less legitimate, less revered option.
100%. I think we far too driven by comparison in this age. And
It's the thief of joy.
it is. It really is. And it stops us, it stops us doing things perhaps that we were meant to do. It's also the thief possibly of meaning and purpose as well.
Because we end up living someone else's story.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's hard sometimes, particularly if people come from some cultures. So I have friends from Asian cultures. I know someone who is a dentist because she's faithfully obeying her parents. She's a very unhappy dentist and she loves graphic design and she does graphic design whenever she can. But
on teeth? That would be incredible.
Tooth graffiti.
I think you can do that. Actually, that's another business idea, isn't it?
Amazing.
But I think that sometimes we do things for a whole load of reasons which aren't linked into our gifting and our joy. And
can I say to your point though, one of the greatest challenges is that we often have parents who are trying to shape us in the best possible versions of us. To your point, pick the best job, the best career, get the best marks so you can get into the best place to do the best job. Part of that is we want the best for you.
Yep.
And part of the hardness is if you turned around and said, I want to do creative writing because I want to write science fiction novels.
Yep.
And that's what I'm really passionate about. Every parent everywhere goes, kid, you're going to be living in my house until you're 35 with a collection of Star Trek plates on the wall. And that's fear-inducing, right?
Yep.
It is also learning the ability to say, no, I'm going to throw my heart at this and go for it, but I just need you to trust me that this is the thing I was passionate about. I did computing science and what I wanted to do was fine arts because my parents were like, no, you don't get a choice in this. You're doing computing science. And I hated it. Like, you cannot pay me enough to do IT. Like, I just don't like it. Now I'm doing it for my children, but like, unconditional love. That is part of the biggest challenge for someone who's in that situation who wants to go, I just want to be doing musicals. And their parents are like, you need to be a doctor. And it's like, that is so far away from what I'm called, or, to learn the abilities to humbly and graciously say, I don't think I want to do that. To your parents can be really hard.
Yeah, and maybe you are a doctor for a period of time and then you get the agency to be able to move into your area of passion or increasingly into your area of passion. Like, I think there's a whole load of things you got to balance there. But I don't think you necessarily just follow your passion, because I think that can lead to unhappiness as well, which seems ironic, but it can. It's not necessarily the thing. I think there's a number of things that you got to consider. So your passions, the things that God has put on your heart that you should be concerned about, the world's greatest need, as some have put it. I think that should be part of the motivation as well. The context in which you find yourself, or the people that you feel God has called you to love, I think that's part of it too. So there's different areas of experience and so on that you've got that your calling is probably somewhere at the heart of it. And you need wise counsel, as you saw it. I think that's really helpful as well. But most of all, you need to bring this before God and ask God.
And what I think you're saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if I bring in the concepts of our last episode as well, for the Christian who is the miserable dentist, if I can use the example, in the face of that misery, it is still possible, albeit difficult. But if you reflect on the why and the how, by reframing certain relationships with career, even in a what that you're not entirely enjoying, you can still find meaning and purpose to a degree. And I think dovetailing into that, for the reason of what does God want me to do? Well, in this very day, he wants me to do what I'm doing.
Yep.
Is that a correct theological statement to make?
Yep, I think that's right. I think God could be shaping you through that. And I think you can find a way to do it with dignity, serving God and asking God to show you where is the joy in this.
Yeah. Not to say that you can't re-examine in next year, or it's not that you, but as long as I'm here.
Exactly. So I often say to people, ask God. Like, I think God is a God who wants to channel us into the thing he wants us to do. And sometimes if we don't listen to him, like my experience, you might end up losing your contract and you think, oh, that's the way he gets your attention. He wants to channel us. He's open to channeling us with the least amount of pain, hopefully, but sometimes we ignore him. So stay open. And if you don't feel that nudging or the door doesn't open, then focus on your context for the time being, but know that God is with you in that.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's go to part 3, next episode, because I think what we should do is shape some of the, like God wants us to have life and have it to the full, but we've also got a whole bunch of people who are burning out in the workplace. So to your point, how do we manage it when we don't necessarily sit in the calling that we feel like God's called us to be, and we're feeling all these exhaustions, anxieties, scatteredness start to well up inside of us? How do we manage both of those? Let's do that next week in episode number 3. Cara, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next week, team, for part 3 of this conversation.